Okay, I think it's time to start. So a big welcome to all the participants and attendees for this, I would almost say, annual tradition of the MEP Water Group to present the United Nations Water Report into the context of the European Parliament, in the context with UNESCO. I'm very sorry that I have to apologize our chair, Ms. MEP Penier Weiss, at this moment, but due to an unforeseen emergency, she is not able to attend the launch of this session, but she will join us later on during the course of this session. I think, as you all know, this year's report is dedicated to groundwater, to make the visible invisible. And across the week, several events have taken place all across the globe. In particularly, I would say in Dakar, where we have had this week the World Water Forum, but also in the World Expo in Dubai, where this week we had a special dedicated session or dedicated week, thematic week, also to water. Now, before I let the speakers take the floor, I would like to stress one of the main takeaways from the event that the Slovenian government organized in Dubai on the UN Water Report. During its presidency of the European Union, the Slovenian government led the update of the water governance conclusions, in which it stressed the need to collaborate and to coordinate towards what we call a water smart society. Particularly during this event, collaboration and cooperation based on research and innovation in Europe were stressed as the heart of, I would say, water smart management of groundwater. Also, during the session by the Slovenian government, the concept that we know as water-oriented living labs were stressed as a key tool to ensure effective cooperation and deployment of the right solutions in an inclusive and transparent way. Just to briefly conclude my introduction, I would like to stress one significant key data, which is mentioned in the report. I think it's a very nice figure. It's 154. Yeah. 154 is mentioned as the number all around the globe of countries which share at least one groundwater aquifer. And I think it's an important figure to remember, and especially for this special occasion. So with a brief introduction, I would like to give the word to Louise Haxthausen. Please, Louise, take the floor.
Thank you, Dirk, and I hope you can hear me well and see me well. So good morning, yes, everyone, distinguished members of the European Parliament, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Director General of UNESCO, Mrs. Audrey Azoulay, I'm honored to introduce this presentation of the UN World Water Development Report 2022, entitled Groundwater, Making the Invisible Visible. Early this week, as you mentioned, Dirk, the global launch of the report took place in the context of the 9th World Water Forum in Dakar, Senegal. I'd like to thank Water Europe and the MEP Water Group for providing this opportunity to share key findings of this report with the European Parliament for the 5th year in a row, and to discuss its recommendations and specifically their relevance to EU policymaking inside Europe and beyond. Now, groundwater may be invisible, but yet it is so present in our lives. It accounts for approximately 99% of all liquid fresh water on Earth. Groundwater already provides half of the volume of water withdrawn for domestic use by the global population, and around 25% of all water withdrawn for irrigation. This is why it has the potential to provide societies with tremendous social, economic, and environmental benefits, including for climate change adaptation. As water scarcity is on the rise, how can we continue relying on the global benefits of groundwater? And how can these benefits serve our global population more equitably? These are some of the key questions addressed in this year's report. It looks at the challenges posed by pollution and overexploitation. It explores ways that improve use and management of groundwater resources can accelerate the achievement of SDG 6 on clean water and sanitation and contribute more broadly to all SDGs. The report's recommendations provide decision makers with knowledge and tools to formulate and implement sustainable water policies. It also offers best practices, examples, and in-depth analysis to stimulate ideas and actions for better stewardship in the water sector and beyond. Better protecting and managing groundwater is our collective responsibility, and it is in our collective interest. For its part, UNESCO has long worked towards this objective, towards the recognition of the value of groundwater for everyone. UNESCO does so through education, capacity building, and data collection. With our water family, we have developed extensive experience in training people and building a sound knowledge base for efficient and sustainable decision-making in the groundwater field. UNESCO commends the EU and its member states for their efforts to promote internal policies geared towards efficient water management, as well as to add water more systematically and comprehensively in its humanitarian development and peace-building work. On the latter, allow me to welcome the alignment between the recommendations of the World Water Report, this year's edition, and the Council conclusion on water in the EU's external action approved in November 2021 during the Slovenian presidency. Both highlight the importance of internal cooperation, and you were mentioning that too, Dirk, to make water a driver for prosperity and peace. Finally, and to conclude these remarks, on behalf of UNESCO's Director General, I wish to thank all entities that contributed to the report, in particular the UN Water Family. Our deep appreciation also goes to the government of Italy for its long-standing support to UNESCO's World Water Program Assessment Program, which coordinates the preparation of the report. Thank you, and over to you.
Dirk, you are muted.
I said, thank you, Louise, for that kind introduction. And then I would like to continue and pass the word to the Italian ambassador, Stefano Verrecchia. Please, Mr. Verrecchia. You're also muted. You're muted.
No, okay. Sorry for all this inconvenience from the computer, but now I think we are all online. And I wanted to say that it's a great pleasure for me to be here with you today for the presentation of the United Nations World Water Development Report 2022. The topic of this year's edition of the report is both timely and so far insufficiently addressed and understood, maybe. The production of the UN World Water Development Reports by the UNESCO World Water Assessment Program based in the city of Perugia is financially supported by the Italian government and constitutes one of the many streams of the very intense cooperation that Italy has with UNESCO. The UN World Water Development Report represents an authoritative thematic review guiding states in the formulation of sustainable water policies. And the strategic importance of water has been recently recalled by the Council of the European Union. In its November 2021 conclusions on water and the EU's external action, the Council has highlighted how water contributes to sustainable development, poverty reduction, food and nutrition security, human development, climate action, environmental protection, biodiversity, ecosystem preservation, humanitarian action, peace and stability. At the same time, the Council has recognized the increasing anthropic pressures on both the quality and the quantity of water resources worldwide. As you all know, the UN General Assembly in 2010 recognized the right to safe and clean drinking water and sanitation as a human right that is essential for the full enjoyment of life and all human rights. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development Future, a dedicated goal on water, the Sustainable Development Goal number 6, which calls to ensure access to water and sanitation for all, and that interacts with the underpins the other SDGs. An important role has been attached to water and to its sustainable management in enhancing climate resilience and climate change mitigation, as well as for disaster risk reduction. Furthermore, the Convention on Biological Diversity recognizes aquatic ecosystem as a key source of biological diversity. In recognition of the strategic importance of water, the UN has even convened an international conference on water to be held on the March 2023. It will be the first of this kind since 1977, as a testimony of how crucial the issue has become on a global level for its political and social implications. Within the European Green Deal, the importance of water is highlighted in the EU Farm to Fork biodiversity and adaptation strategies. Water management and the protection of water ecosystem were also among the priorities of the Italian presidency of the G20. And at the G20 ministerial meeting on environment that took place in Naples in July 2021, ministers acknowledged that water resources are globally at risk due to the anthropogenic pressures such as growing demand, climate change, pollution, and inadequate sanitation services, and committed to promote cross-sectoral and integrated approaches to sustainability, management and use water resources for multiple purposes, and to protect and restore water ecosystems. Groundwater already provides half of the volume of water withdrawn for domestic use by the global population, including drinking water for more than 90% of the rural population, who do not get their water delivered to them via public or private supply systems, and around 25% of all water withdrawn for irrigation. Groundwater is therefore central to the fight against poverty, to food and water security, to the creation of decent jobs, to socioeconomic development, and to the resilience of societies and economies to climate change. By making visible the invisible value of groundwater, the report allows for a better understanding and management of this natural resource. The report describes the challenges and opportunities associated with the development, management, and governance of groundwater across the world. It makes it clear that in the context of growing water scarcity, the vast potential of groundwater can no longer be overlooked, not least because it provides widespread, easy access to the most vulnerable sectors of our societies. As the report suggests, we must, however, ensure an effective response to the lack of detailed information and knowledge about local groundwater resources. As a matter of fact, this represents an essential prerequisite to the development of groundwater resources and their appropriate management, also at transboundary level. To conclude, I sincerely hope that the findings of the report will inspire us to join forces with the World Water Assessment Program of UNESCO and to contribute to advancing our common agenda and water priorities. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador, for that very nice introduction. Then we will continue with a 2-minute video.
Yes, I will share my screen so you can see it. No sound.
seems we have a bit of a problem with the sound, so we try to to correct that.
We are sorry, give us please just 1 minute to solve the technical issue. 1 minute, I'm sorry.
Very good. So after that very nice video, and I apologize for the little technical issues that we have. We continue with the next part of the program, where we will have Mr. Richard Connor, Editor-in-Chief of this year's report, to present us and give us a good overview of the report. Mr. Connor, can I please give you the floor?
Absolutely, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Let me share my screen. Oh, host disabled participant share a screen share. And we tested it this morning before the start, and everything was fine. So.
Right now, please. Thank you.
Okay, we're on. Is this good? Excellent. Well, accounting for the vast majority of all liquid fresh water on Earth, groundwater has the potential to provide tremendous social, economic, and environmental benefits and opportunities. However, this natural resource is often poorly understood and consequently undervalued, mismanaged, and even abused. Groundwater remains vulnerable to overexploitation and pollution, both of which can have devastating effects on the resource and its availability. In the context of growing water scarcity across many parts of the world, the enormous potential of groundwater and the need to manage it sustainably can no longer be overlooked. The 2022 edition of the United Nations World Water Development Report, titled Making the Invisible Visible, describes the challenges and opportunities associated with the development, management, and governance of groundwater across the world. The report addresses groundwater-related issues from the perspectives of the three main water use sectors, so agriculture, human settlements, and industry, as well as its interactions with ecosystems and its relation to climate change. It highlights different regional perspectives and presents a number of response options concerning data and information, policy and planning, management and governance, as well as financing. The report is published each year by UNESCO on behalf of UN Water, and its production is coordinated by the UNESCO World Water Assessment Program, itself generously funded by the government of Italy and the region of Umbria. Now, let's get straight into it. Globally, water use is expected to grow by roughly 1% per year over the next 30 years. This growth is primarily concentrated in emerging economies and middle and lower income countries. It's driven by industrial development and improving water and sanitation service coverage in combination with population growth, economic development, and shifting diets and consumption patterns. Combined with surface water scarcity, which is increasing due to climate change, the water crisis facing humanity is real, but it is avoidable. And while our reliance on groundwater will also definitely increase, its full potential remains largely untapped. Groundwater accounts for 99% of all liquid fresh water on Earth. Massive volumes of fresh water are present below ground and distributed over the entire globe. However, their abundance and the conditions for their withdrawal can vary from different place to place. As Louise mentioned, at the global level, 25% of the total fresh water we use comes from groundwater. Groundwater provides 50% of the fresh water withdrawn for domestic use worldwide, including the drinking water for the vast majority of rural populations. It also accounts for around 25% of all water withdrawn for irrigation. Groundwater withdrawal boomed during the 20th century, starting during the early decades in the US, in Mexico, and several European countries, and in most other countries during the second part of the century or near its end. However, as we will discuss later, several countries have yet to take full advantage of their groundwater resources. The rate of global aggregated groundwater depletion is considerable. It accounts for roughly 15 to 25% of total groundwater withdrawals. while figure 3.2 here provides an overview of groundwater table decline in some of the world's major aquifers, local hotspots can be found in many other parts of the world. In extreme cases, concentrated groundwater depletion can lead to land subsidence, as observed across several shrinking cities, such as Houston, Mexico, Venice, Bangkok, and Jakarta. The quality of groundwater is generally good, which means it can be used safely and affordably without requiring advanced levels of treatment. Compared to surface waters, groundwater systems are usually better protected against pollution. However, groundwater pollution is a virtually irreversible process. Once contaminated, aquifers tend to remain polluted. And as logic would dictate, shallow aquifers are generally more vulnerable to surface pollution than deeper ones. In order to meet the growing global demand for food by 2050, it is of critical importance to increase agricultural productivity through the sustainable intensification of groundwater abstraction. Groundwater can be an important source for smaller farm holders, especially where a perennial and reliable source of shallow groundwater exists. Regions heavily reliant on groundwater for irrigation include North America and South Asia, where respectively 59% and 57% of the areas equipped for irrigation use groundwater. This greatly contrasts with sub-Saharan Africa, whose countries you don't see in this figure, where only 3% of the cultivated land is under irrigation, and only 5% of that is irrigated with groundwater. We'll get back to this important point a little bit later. Nearly 50% of the global urban population are believed today to be supplied by groundwater sources. Numerous cities and towns, including many of the world's largest cities, rely on groundwater as their major source of fresh water. This dependence will intensify, particularly in the rapidly urbanizing areas of developing countries and emerging economies. Access to groundwater allows water utilities to develop water supplies at a much lower cost and allow lower connection charges. Groundwater is often also the only feasible and affordable way to extend basic water access to unserved rural populations in most of the world. This is especially true in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia, where the rural population is large but dispersed. The impact of inadequate or inappropriate sanitation on groundwater supply is a serious concern, especially for shallow aquifers. In cities in developing countries and larger informal settlements, the majority of the total population are served by in situ sanitation. So we're talking about septic tanks, latrines, and unfortunately, even the practice of open defecation. This significantly increases the risk of groundwater pollution. In rural areas, persistent contamination from pathogens is estimated to affect about 30% of the total installations. The settlements, both temporary and permanent, of displaced people require special attention. The construction of well-designed water wells, in conjunction with the appropriately sited and well-maintained sanitation systems, is absolutely vital in these cases. Good examples include the Turkish cities receiving large numbers of Syrian refugees and the Rohingya refugee camps in Bangladesh. Such settlements or such settlement areas source water from deep water wells constructed by aid or relief agencies. Industries that withdraw groundwater include manufacturing, mining, oil and gas, energy generation, engineering, and construction. The oil and gas and mining industries, through their various activities, may have ample in-house data on the location and extent of aquifers and their properties. Such data could be very useful to hydrologists, governments, and water supply utilities. Groundwater supports the base flows of streams and rivers, a crucial water source that determines the risk of falling dry during periods of drought. Terrestrial ecosystems depend on groundwater in all biomes of the world. While groundwater management often focuses on the aquifers themselves, groundwater in ecosystems need to be managed together in order to ensure the continued provision of critical ecosystem services. Groundwater is less impacted by climate change and climate variations than surface waters, and presents great opportunities in terms of climate change adaptation and mitigation. Groundwater-based adaptations to climate change exploit groundwater storage and the capacity of aquifer systems to store seasonal or episodic water surpluses. They incur substantially lower evaporative losses than conventional infrastructure, such as surface reservoirs. The development of geothermal energy, a sustainable energy source, can play an important role in reducing CO2 emissions. Deep aquifers can also be used for carbon capture and sequestration. In the interest of time, I'll focus only on Africa, which possesses large groundwater resources. As shown here, most countries in Western and Central Africa have little groundwater storage, but high annual rainfall and therefore regular recharge. Conversely, many countries in Northern and Southern Africa have considerable groundwater storage despite low levels of recharge. This storage provides a significant buffer before abstraction will impact the regional groundwater system. As I mentioned earlier, only 3% of the total cultivated land in sub-Saharan Africa is under irrigation, and only 5% of that is irrigated with groundwater. The development of groundwater could act as a catalyst for economic growth by increasing the extent of irrigated areas and therefore improving agricultural yields and crop diversity. Groundwater development in sub-Saharan Africa is not currently limited by a lack of groundwater, but rather by a lack of investment, most notably in infrastructure, institutions, trained professionals, and knowledge of the resource. Scientific knowledge in hydrogeology and the methods and tools available are sufficient to address most groundwater management issues. The challenge lies more with the scarcity of reliable data for area-specific groundwater assessments and scenario analyses. Groundwater data collected with public funds should be freely accessible. Private companies should disclose relevant data and information concerning subsurface water-related parameters that would improve the assessment and management of groundwater. All too often, groundwater policy is primarily focused on the utilization of groundwater after abstraction. This is far removed from sound management of the aquifer, which requires attention to land use, replenishment, protection, and implementation of measures that aim to preserve groundwater system services and functions. Governments need to fully assume their role as resource custodians in view of the common good aspects of groundwater and ensure that access to and profit from groundwater is distributed equitably. Policies, strategies, and plans should be tailored to the local context, based on the priorities and aspirations of the local population, and informed by sound scientific evidence. As Dirk mentioned, transboundary aquifer management is very important, but it currently suffers from a lack of institutional will and insufficient resources to collect the necessary information, especially at the local level. Coordinating and harmonizing and sharing data represents the first step in cooperation between neighboring countries. Governments need to use the limited financial resources more efficiently through tailored initiatives. For example, groundwater storage and abstraction can be included as part of urban water supply management in order to add security and flexibility in the case of seasonal resource variation. This would allow to further leverage existing funding from official development assistance, from water supply and sanitation tariffs, and even from public-private partnerships. Fees and taxes in other sectors, such as in agriculture, can also help finance groundwater initiatives and reduce potential negative externalities. In many countries, publicly funded activities in other sectors contribute to the depletion or pollution of groundwater resources. For example, subsidies in the energy sector can incentivize the over-abstraction of groundwater by reducing electricity charges. Or farm subsidies that encourage crops with high water demands can become perverse incentives. Reforming harmful subsidies and aligning them with groundwater policies should be part of the water financing agenda. So in conclusion, in summary, just a few takeaway messages. The abundance of groundwater resources will prove essential in meeting increasing global demands for water, especially during periods of severe water stress. Improved groundwater management and governance are needed in order to avoid overexploitation and contamination. Groundwater systems support valuable ecosystem services and can play a critical role in climate change adaptation and mitigation. The development of underexploited groundwater resources in places like sub-Saharan Africa offer opportunities for food security and economic growth. Given the common pool nature of groundwater, all data and information about aquifer systems should be made available to groundwater managers. And finally, unlocking the full potential of groundwater for ourselves and for future generations will require strong and concerted efforts to manage and use it sustainably. And it all starts by making the invisible visible. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for your kind attention. And you, of course, hope that you download the report that is quite rich in information and that you find what you're looking for in there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Connor, for that very informative overview of this, I think, very interesting report. I think you have given us also quite a few indications on how we can, I would say, improve the sustainable groundwater the management of groundwater resources, both globally, but also, I would say, within Europe. So with that, because I think now we're entering the remit of the European Parliament there. So with that, I'm very happy to announce that we have our chair amongst us, Ms. Penier Wijs, and I'd like to transfer now the chair to Penier. Penier, please take the floor.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, you can hear me now. Thank you, and good morning to everybody who has been here on time. I did not, and I apologize very much for that. But in my schedule for today was a hidden message that I was appointed to come to one of the hospitals in Copenhagen to get my hearing devices because I'm deaf, and new apparatuses was ready for me, and there was a kind of a one short occasion to my schedule or in this spring to make that happen. So now I'm actually using my new devices to listen, and I have done that since I was jumping out of one of the big buildings at the Bispebjerg Hospital. I apologize very much for that, but that's also just a matter of normal life for me. So thank you for being patient. I am very happy to see so many of you attending this important Friday after a very, very important International Day, Wednesday, on Groundwater, the World Water Day. Of course, this week also have been in the European Parliament a lot about the war in Europe and the Putin attack on Ukraine. But we did manage, the MEP Water Group of colleagues, to send to the Commission important questions to be addressed in order to do exactly what you ask us to do, Mr. Connor, to make the invisible visible. Because we know as European legislators, co-legislators, together with the Council, that there is a lot of importance in what we do on many, many, many levels and topics related to water that is on the European political agenda, not that visible that we would like it to be. But luckily, together with Dirk and your team, and also the many stakeholders in the water industry, governments, NGOs, researchers, we are really trying to push the topic forward. And this week's occasions, I hope we will end by this Friday conversation with some concrete, maybe appointments of how we go on together forward. I will not take up so much time now. I'm very much looking forward for the next panelists, but I would like, I don't know if that's a possibility, Dirk, because it would be, from my side, very valuable if Mr. Connor could answer one quick question from my side, also to announce that since last month, I am now also a member of the STOA panel, the research panel of the European Parliament, who actually has a lot of resources into research. Yes, you said that the report we have at hand now from UNESCO has all answers to all questions. But I really would like also to hear if there still remains a specific area within between technologies and water scarcity and especially, of course, groundwater that still needs some heavy research to be done, because that is actually a way to activate some of the sources and the platform and the expertise that the framework of STOA as a part of the background and the foundation beneath solid and also future-proof policymaking in EU. So if you could make a wish, Mr. O'Connor, what would you like the European Union, the STOA panel for the European Parliament to shed more light, academic light onto that would push the water agenda even higher to not only the awareness, but also to the concrete proposals of what are the missing links, especially in between management, government, cooperation, and the ask also that you reiterate that we need more data, and we need data that tells us what we need to know to address exactly how we can improve. That should be my, not now that I hear, but maybe it's because I really like to hear that I can hear also what I'm saying myself. A long way into actually a meant to be very short question. So thank you so much. And thank you again for being so patient with me. I will stay until the very last minute of this very important morning. Thank you all.
Okay, well, that's a pretty difficult question, especially from the European perspective. If we just go to groundwater, we're talking, first of all, we're talking about, yes, getting more data, understanding much more about the resource. The thing is, Europe and North America are, compared to the rest of the world, are much, much more advanced in terms of the ability to research. So, the physical parameters of your groundwater resources are comparatively much better known than across different parts of the world. So, of course, through UNESCO, the WWDR, we're really focusing on those areas that perhaps need the most help. I'm honestly not aware enough of the European situation, particularly. I do understand that the water directive has a very important environmental aspect to it, and I think that is absolutely essential to strengthen, because without protecting the catchment areas and without protecting the areas where groundwater is recharged, the potential for contamination is huge. And as I mentioned earlier, once groundwater is contaminated, the process is almost irreversible. So my initial reaction would be, it's not so much the institutional research and human capacity, nor the amount of data and measurement equipment and infrastructure that's missing. And I think legally, the legal and governance frameworks are in place. Perhaps the biggest question is the question of enforcement. To ensure that these catchment areas are protected. And again, because pollution is irreversible, you're not just protecting it for the short term, you're really protecting it for future generations. And I think that's where there's the biggest both challenge, but the most important. I'll stop there. I'm more comfortable talking about Africa, quite frankly.
I appreciate that, but also in terms of the neighborship relationships between Africa and the EU, that could actually be a part of researching, coming up with solid evidence-based recommendations in how to both ensure investments, but also how to develop ecosystem support from water infrastructure to the growth in African regions. I'm also the member of the delegation of ACP EU, and we have in the next weekend a plenary coming up where I know that the climate challenges is a very important part of the conversation. And I mean, so maybe we should continue the conversation on a more bilateral ideation stage, if by any chance there is also some resources that could be activated in order to formulate something that is very concrete, attaching to the cooperation between Africa and EU companies and researchers in how to do what you are asking for to be done in Africa. That is also something that has a very high priority from the EU, of course. So maybe that's the angle how to do it.
I can address that very, very quickly so that we can move on to the panelists. But it's really human capacity, human and institutional capacity is truly what's missing. Because we talk about we don't have enough data, we don't understand the resource enough. But it's not, and yes, it takes people on the ground to actually measure and then take these measurements and then also study and analyze it so it can be used. And we have to train the people on the ground in the countries themselves. So that's where the #1 point of investment, until you have the human and institutional capacity to do so, you're not going to be able to organize the data gathering and analysts mechanisms. So the quick where to put the #1 focus would definitely be on capacity building. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Okay, so Thank you to you, Richard Connor. I guess then it is my pleasure to open up the next part of the session, which is the panel discussions and Q&A, where the moderator is Sophie Vermorten, groundwater expert from Deltares. I hope I said that correctly. Ms. Vermorten, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Indeed, it's Vermorten. So, so welcome everybody, and to the panel discussion. And just before I give the floor to the panelists, I would just like to share these few words. We've seen also in a report that groundwater in Europe offers many services to its community, whether it's for drinking water, for nature, for food, for sustainable energy like aquifer thermal energy storage, and for the industry. And different European water-related directives deal with this invisible resource. I think in Europe, it does remain a challenge to approach groundwater in an integral way because of the many services it can provide, but also because of its very strong relation with surface water. Especially also because of the different regions of Europe, where the contexts are very much different. This because of different climate zones, but also how the subsurface itself is built up and a socio-economical context. Well, today we have in our panel several experts representing different groundwater fields of work or sectors. And I would like to introduce them now. We have Stefano Burci, who is chairman of the International Association of Water Law, called AIDA, and expert on transboundary groundwater governance. We have on the panel Jippe Hogeveen, who is chief technical advisor at the FAO and will represent the perspective of the agricultural sector. And we have Tom Diaz, who is director water resources and environment at the Water Group in Flanders. And he will give the perspective from the topic of groundwater and human settlements, as it is referred to in the report. So to start the discussion, I would like to be the first to ask a question to the panelists, and then I will give the floor to the audience. So please, if you have questions, don't hesitate to use the chat to put them in, and I can then read them and select the ones to address. So here's my question to the panelists. In the last sentence of the executive summary of the report, I quote, unlocking the full potential of groundwater will require strong and concerted efforts to manage and use it sustainably. I really like this sentence. And my question to you would be, where do you see the biggest opportunity in Europe to unlock the potential of groundwater from the perspective of the field of work you represent today? So I would like to start with Stefano. Could you answer that question, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Sophie. Thank you for all participants to be present at this meeting. Now, from the perspective of transboundary groundwater governance, which is my field of expertise as a complement to the law. Now, in Europe in particular, there is a solid basis, legal, institutional, economic, and otherwise, for the governance of transboundary water resources that is targeted primarily at surface waters and rivers, lakes, and basins. Comparatively speaking, the legal, institutional, and other basis for the governance of transboundary aquifers and groundwater is less developed. We have one stellar example, which is, serves as an example, the world over, of governance of transboundary aquifer. It is the Geneva aquifer, shared by France and Switzerland, which is a very cogent, compelling example of system for the governance of a transboundary aquifer, and there are a handful of local arrangements between units, sub-national levels of units of government across borders between and among countries. So the greatest potential that I see for the future of, as you said, unlocking the full potential of groundwater from a transboundary governance perspective that I see to my mind in Europe is to capitalize on and expand on the existing legal, institutional, economic, financial, and other cooperative arrangements that are targeted on freshwater to cover and to expand and extend to the groundwater that underlies rivers, lakes, and basins. Already there is, already the Danube River Commission is going in that direction. And this is a direction that is not only, specific, or that I would, personally regard as, the future and the most potential for unlocking the potential for groundwater, not only in Europe, it's not just in Europe, but it's also in other parts of the world. And we have examples already of that happening in other parts of the world as regards the transboundary governance perspective of groundwater. I'll stop here and I'll be happy to answer questions if you have, if any come from the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefano. Thank you. Thank you so much for addressing this question. Jippe, what would be your perspective and your answer to the question I posed before?
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Sophie. Well, first of all, we have to acknowledge that the agricultural sector is an important part of the problem that we are currently having with the reducing availability of groundwater. The agricultural sector uses globally 70% of water withdrawals, and it uses more and more groundwater, and specifically in areas where the rainfall is erratic and where there is little surface water. In Europe, that would be the Mediterranean areas mainly, and also the eastern part of Europe. Here, irrigation is already very important, and it is becoming more important in the context of climate change. So the weather patterns over there become more erratic, and farmers they need additional water resources to assure that they can harvest their crops with a reliable yield. And in these areas, groundwater is still often a reliable source of water, but we see already that globally 30% of the water used for irrigation comes from groundwater, and that is increasing. We see that globally that happens specifically in areas around the coasts, and where the population densities are often higher, and there is more competition for groundwater, and this then can lead to groundwater shortages, and eventually that threatens the potable water supply, and also can lead to groundwater intrusion. And this you see then in Europe again. You see this specifically on islands in the Mediterranean Sea. In Malta, for example, that's an example that over here there are problems with the potable water supply that is getting saline. And to tackle this, the only way to tackle this is either you have to reduce water use in agriculture, or you have to use you have to desalinize water from desalinized seawater. The problem is, and it has been said already by Rick also, that water resources in general, and then specifically groundwater, they are so badly monitored. The problem is you can't see it, only the groundwater, only when you dig a hole until you get to the groundwater level. So in my view, if we want to use groundwater wisely, then we should focus specifically on improving the monitoring of the groundwater resources, and that needs to be done by water accounting. So we have to keep track of the groundwater balance, and if you do this properly, then on good water accounts and good, we should develop good regulations and governance mechanisms. And what is also very important, specifically in the agricultural sector that uses so much water, that these rules are well understood and accepted by the stakeholders, and that they can be enforced by authorities. Because only with good groundwater governance, the full potential of groundwater resources can be unlocked. So to come back a little bit on monitoring again, and also related to the question that Pernille Weiss asked, what we do within FAO, for example, we focus specifically on monitoring water resources in general, and we do that also with satellite remote sensing. So for us, the Copernicus program of Europe is extremely important. We make a lot of use of those data in our water accounting work, and this is then specifically also useful in areas like in Africa where monitoring is very difficult. And then with satellite remote sensing, you can have a quick idea of what is happening on the ground. Of course, I fully support also what Rick says, that you need to have people on the ground to interpret these data and to work on ground truthing of this data and compare it with reality. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jippe, for this answer. And I fully agree. I also think that with all the developments in Europe with respect to digital twins, I would very much welcome a digital twin on groundwater for certain regions, incorporating all the data from the Copernicus program, etc. Going to Tom Dietz, do you want to answer the question I posed before? Tom, are you there? Oh, it seems we lost him. Let me check quickly. Yeah, I cannot see him in the panel. So I think I will proceed with the next questions from the audience. I've seen one question that I think is very relevant to this meeting is the question of conflict of interest. Especially in Europe, you see that groundwater can be used by many sectors. And the question is, can I read it out in the chat? Apart from research, data availability, technology for monitoring and predicting groundwater status and capacity building, the key issue remains the involvement of stakeholders, resource users, who may have conflicting interests and contribute to aquifer pollution and depletion. How do you think we should tackle their involvement? I think I will give that question to Stefano, being very much related to governance, I guess. Would you be able to answer that question, Stefano?
Yes, with pleasure. In fact, it doesn't have to do with the transboundary dimension of governance, but very much with the domestic dimension of governance, which to me is as critical as, if not more critical than, the transboundary dimension of governance, because of the kinds of issues that are embedded in this question. Because there are strong competing and maybe conflicting interests at stake in the allocation of groundwater resources, and groundwater in particular, for different uses. And that is not going to decrease. In fact, the level of competition is only going to increase as the importance of groundwater, especially as a buffer, against the climate variability, increases, and the quality of it is threatened by pollution. So now, how to address these problems? Well, from the governance, which includes, the legal perspective, the regulatory perspective, the institutional dimension, the involvement of stakeholders is promoted and is through water laws, environmental laws, environmental protection laws, at the level of decision making. When decisions are to be made about allocation decisions of a scarce resource, laws generally, by and large, provide opportunities for involvement and participation of affected stakeholders by these decisions. So it's one thing, participation in the process that leads to decision making about allocating the resource, for instance, developing the resource, a scarce, increasingly scarce resource. But at the same time, the opportunity for conflict and competition is, minimized, not entirely offset, but at least minimized, if again you have a legal system in place that regulates and establishes a regulated process for the access to the resource, the allocation of a scarce resource among competing interests and uses. And it is at that level, through a regulated process, where conflicting interests are balanced with a view to achieving the best possible outcome, under whatever parameters you define that outcome, that then you minimize the opportunity for conflict and at the same time enhance the opportunity for participation of stakeholders in decision making. But this requires a serious, well-crafted, well thought out legal environment, regulatory environment, and a serious, well-capacitated government administration that is capable of administering this legal environment, all the way to enforcing, the prescriptions when they are mandatory and they require certain behaviors from users and users of the resource, stakeholders at large, and whatever. I'll stop here because this is may open up a whole Pandora box, but in a nutshell, this is my own take of the very rich question that was posed by the participants.
Thank you, Stefano. I would like to move to a completely different question, which has to do with something else that is very much invisible, even more invisible than the groundwater that we already know. And I'm talking about the offshore groundwater reserves. So there's a question from the audience on there's some new information, some new knowledge on offshore aquifers. What do we think about it? That's the question. And I'm not sure if one of the panelists can take this question. Maybe Yippie, you can have a shot at it, but you can also tell me if you...
This is an extremely difficult question for me. I really would not know to answer answer it. For yes, we look mainly at terrestrial water use. So I know I think I'll pass because maybe Stefano, you I would not know what to say something sensible about this. I'm very sorry.
I can try to say a few words of it because I know that the map has been published by universities and knowledge institutes on the potential of offshore groundwater. I think first step would really be mapping it well to know what we're talking about, and also protect it and reserve it in the future in case we need it. That would be my answer to this question. Stefano, anything to add on this?
Yes, in actual fact, this is, how can I say, perhaps the cutting edge as regards, the groundwater. And from again, I cannot speak from except from my own perspective, which is governance cum legal, cum institutional, dimension. Now, that particular, the offshore aquifers have been the target of attention from this governance perspective lately by a researcher whom I know personally quite well. Now, that is I'm going to say, perhaps something that deserves, in my opinion, perhaps that would be an interesting subject, for further investigation. The chairman, Ms. Weiss, was inviting, suggestions for research. Well, that's definitely one field of research from the governance perspective, because of the implications from the law of the sea, because these things, these aquifers are under the seabed, so that involves, the issues of law of the sea, but at the same time, it's freshwater. So it brings in, the dimension of, different legal instruments for the management of resources, which are often transboundary in nature, because they are under the seabed, but that particular section of seabed is shared by or traversed by the border, between countries that extends into, the sea, 20 miles and beyond. Now, I'm not a specialist of the law of the sea, but there is a great potential, to my mind, for investigation and research into this particular dimension of the aquifers in view of the dual, domains that are brought in from a governance perspective, i.e. the law of the sea and the law of freshwater and transboundary freshwater and aquifers in particular. But research has been done. So if anybody is interested, I can point to this particular piece of research that has been done, has been carried out. I think it was a PhD research that was conducted by a particular very highly respected, researcher whom I know well, and I'd be happy to put whoever is interested in touch with this particular person, including, of course, the chair of this meeting, Madame Weiss, if she's interested, pursuing this lead for the European Parliament.
Thank you, Stefano. I'm going to go to maybe the final question, depends how quickly we are in answering it, but I think I would like to go to the topic also of nature-based solutions and the potential of that and the relation with groundwater. Because in the report, there's also a sentence, especially I think this is very much relevant for Europe, where it states that aquifer systems have the capacity to store seasonal or episodic water surplus. I think this is very much something we are already looking at, of course, in Europe, but could be even more. My question to the panelists, and the question also from the audience would be, what can we do in Europe to take advantage of this? So how can we use those nature-based solutions and groundwater even more than we are doing today, looking both at the advantages when you look at the storing of the volumes of water, but also the way the subsurface and groundwater can clean contaminants in a natural way. Big question, Jippe, can you want to have a shot at it?
Yes, well, yeah. Thank you. I think this is it's a very important question, and it gives a lot of possibilities, specifically in Europe, because we often we're talking about groundwater, and often we talk about surface water, but they are in contact with each other. So what is first surface water often becomes later on groundwater, and then again it can also become again surface water. In the end, most of the groundwater comes again to the surface in water courses and also in wetlands. So specifically in the context of climate change, it is important currently to increase the storage of water, and that should be it is nicer to do that with natural based solution than building large dams. So we should we should develop more marshes and more wetlands. And indeed, these wetlands, they also then have help in cleaning the surface water and the groundwater. So in the Netherlands, there is a lot of experience with that already. They have this program where they give more space to the rivers. So before, it was in the second half of the last century, what we did is we wanted to get as fast as possible rid of all the water, because then farmers could get on the field as early as possible, and that was good for their agricultural production, for their yields and so on. But nowadays we see that we need that water also later on in the season, in the summer, so we have to store water, and the groundwater storage is extremely important, but also storage in wetlands can help a lot. So these nature-based solutions are of course very much preferable than building large dams. Thank you.
Thank you, Jippe, for this answer. And with that, I think it was the last question we could answer within this panel. Yeah, as a groundwater expert myself, I cannot emphasize enough how important it is to make it visible, especially in Europe, where I'm working a lot. And I hope we can use it, make it more visible, so we can contribute to the challenges of the Green Deal. With that, I would like to give the floor back to Pernille de Wijs. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Maybe I should explain that I'm using my little phone, because that's the only device that is connected to my hearing devices for the moment. So that's why I'm doing like this. It doesn't look very professional, but it works. I can still hear what you're saying. And it was very interesting. Thank you so much for taking us, Sophie, through this very important panel discussion, and also for the questions in the chat. I saw that Lars Skov would like to intervene for just 3 minutes on rural issues, since Tom was not available. I think we could have time for that still, Lars, if you would like to have granted the 3 minutes before I make a quick wrap up of this Friday morning. Lars, are you still with us and ready to take the floor? Maybe Dirk, you can help me if there is some kind of reaction.
So now I should be unmuted. Do you hear me?
Yes, we hear you, Lars, but we don't see you.
That's okay. That's not a pleasant sight, but that's okay.
Okay.
Yeah. So very briefly, in Denmark, we started using groundwater for urban water supply in 1850s in response to the cholera epidemic in Copenhagen. This very rapidly spread to the rural areas, where farmers understood, and the population and farmers understood, that they should stop competing for groundwater. So we formed by cooperatives.
Please, Lars,
yes.
Pernille speaking. If anyone can, who is having a noise going through this meeting, or is it your background noise, Lars?
This is my background noise.
Okay, then we have Lars.
I'm standing in Roskilde.
Yeah, and Roskilde is a very beautiful town. I know that. Can you try now without the noise?
Do you hear me better now?
Yes, that's better. Thank you. 2 minutes.
Good. Yeah. Okay. So the rural development, rural water supply in Denmark is based on the cooperative movement. So farmers very quickly realized that they should not compete for water, but unite. And the important aspect of this is that today we still manage to deliver rural water at a cost of €1 per cubic meter. So it means that groundwater and its total treatment and distribution is affordable for all. And basically, this is so important. Yeah, this is so important for the rural people. And I just keep to my note. Yes. And what you should remember across the world is that poor people are willing to pay more for water than governments are willing to charge. And I think you really need to look into modern technologies that enable the delivery of water in rural areas at safe water in rural areas at an affordable price. So thank you very much for giving me the word.
Thank you so much, Lars from Roskilde. I really like that every time we meet in this on this platform in MEP Water together with Dirk and your team, that we are so interactive. That is really good with this iterative conversation. So thank you so much all for participating. I would like to make a quickly wrap up, and if I then can ask everybody to mute themselves, or maybe there's still Roskilde coming in the background. Thank you. Roskilde is now where Roskilde is and not together with us. We like that. So thank you so much, everybody. No, there is still some noise coming in, and it's not from my hearing device. Please mute yourselves. Okay. I would especially like to thank you, so of course, all the participants in the panel, and also Mr. Connor from UNESCO. I would like to also try to just make a very quick drawing of what I will take down, as we say in this modern language, from this event concerning groundwater and what needs to be done both on a global and a regional level. I think we need to continue a conversation, some of us, in how to conduct some kind of, I don't know if it's a research project or something that addresses how we can involve stakeholders and remove, identify and then remove the conflicting interests. Also seen from the recommendation that I heard from Mr. Burki, that it's about if the legal and regulatory frameworks are smooth and logic and coherent, then that minimizes the amount of conflicting interests, of course. But I think maybe we need to address where are actually the legal and regulatory conflicting interests, and what needs to be done, especially in Europe, because we have this fundamental legal framework in the institutions of EU, that there are national competences and there are union level competences, and we have different member states levels of development, infrastructure, capacity, knowledge, technologies also. So I would very much like to continue a conversation, especially with you, Mr. Burki, but also others in this morning event. If you have something to contribute within the next, let's say, 4 to 5 weeks, for me to then maybe draft a proposal for this kind of missing link of suggestions of improvements of the legal and regulatory frameworks. Because if that is the key work to work with and we are a rule of law community in Europe, so we need to make the paragraphs work in the direction we want them. So if that is what we need to do, I would very much like to initiate this and also to share ownership to that idea from this week on, from this Friday morning on, because we used 90 minutes together focusing on groundwater, and also hopefully in a way where the union, the European Union, can be kind of a role model and dynamo of global change. I hope also that echoes what Mr. Connor and UNESCO would like still to recognize EU to do. So thank you all. Thank you, Dirk, for taking my part of the show in the beginning. And thank you, Sophie, for being a brilliant host of the panel debate, and thank you all who participated and also were very active in the chat. It's very highly appreciated. Stay healthy, stay happy, and stay safe wherever you are, and the best for our common future, and especially for the people in Ukraine at the moment. Thank you so much.